Over the past few years, with all the money printing, with all the inflation that we have seen an absolute explosion in the amount of how much everything costs. I mean, we've already gone over 1,000,000 times with the housing market, how much things have become unaffordable with that. And today, I want to talk a little bit about cars, because cars are something that's way more attainable for the average American. A lot of people have cars. If you don't live in the middle of a city center somewhere where there's excellent public transportation, chances are you own a car. And the problem is, it's getting to the point where people can't even afford that anymore. Right now, guys, the cost of a new car payment is almost as much as rent used to cost. The monthly payment for a brand new vehicle hit a brand new high in the final quarter of 2023, and it's now at $739 per month. The previous quarter was $736 per month, and a year prior to that, it was $717 per month. So as you can see, this is a figure that continues to creep up, and up. And it's not even just the car payment that has increased like crazy. The down payment has also substantially increased to a record high of $7,000 for a brand new car. On top of all of that, there are now more people than ever that have $1,000 a month or more car payments. And this is something that we heard about at least a year or two ago, but this is a new story about this because that number is continuing to rise. That's the scary part here. In the fourth quarter of 2023, the amount of people that have a car payment above $1,000 a month is now at almost 18%, guys. 17.9% is the figure. And a year prior to that, it was 15.7%. So it literally went up 2.2% in 1 year. So more and more people are signing up for these ridiculous car payments that are just astronomical. And I know somebody that knows a ton about cars that can speak more on this. So take a look at what Brandon from Car Questions Answered has to say about this.
All right, Michael, so you're talking about car payments being at the highest point that they've ever been, and really there's no surprise to that, because what's happened in the market over the last 3 years is that manufacturers have increased their prices to record highs. And Michael, it's not just manufacturers and the Fed that are fueling these fires, it's dealers. So new car dealers over the last 3 years, what have they done? They've added these bogus fees, these bogus markups, market adjustments. I've seen market adjustments all the way up to $30,000 on some vehicles. So when you get these overinflated prices of these MSRPs and you get used cars that are being sold for sometimes 140% higher than what the value of the car actually is, and then you add on these market adjustments, this nitrogen that dealerships are making people have to pay on these vehicles, this is just a setup for disaster in the car market, and that's what we're seeing right now. That's why you're seeing repo rates rise, you're seeing auto loan delinquencies spiking through the roof, and it's something that's going to continue, because now all this happy time, all this overspending from the consumer level over these last 3 years, somebody's got to pay the piper, and it's happening now. On top of that, you have insurance costs that have risen. Just in the last 2 years, car insurance has increased by 25%. That is absolutely ridiculous. It's becoming more and more difficult for just the average consumer to be able to even own a vehicle, much less buy a new one or buy another used car. Like even these out here, it's becoming harder and harder for the average consumer. You're seeing it in the housing market, and you're absolutely seeing it in the car market.
So you heard it from him, guys. The fees, the prices, everything that these dealers tack on to this is getting ridiculous, but the cracks are starting to form because people are not able to continue to afford the payments. As he said, the delinquencies on these car loans are starting to shoot through the roof, and it's only going to be a matter of time before this snowballs into a much worse situation than it is. And if you're wondering how people are continuing to afford these car payments, that's another interesting piece of this puzzle, because what they're doing is people are taking out longer loans than ever before. Some people have like 6, 7, 8 year car loans now in order to be able to afford cars at these prices, in order to make their payments, within the realm of their budget, but they're going to be paying this car off longer than they'll even keep it, most likely. And people are literally putting off other expenses in their life in order to buy the car that they want. According to Edmunds, they say that the average loan term for a new car in the second quarter of 2023 was 68.5 months. That's like 5.5 years, guys. And that's just the average. And like Brandon said, that these delinquencies are starting to explode right now. And that is because people can no longer afford to keep up with the ever increasing cost of life right now, plus a huge car payment. Now I know that people only have a brand new car, but even used car payments are still in the realm of $450 to $500 a month in many cases. That's still very expensive for somebody to float, combined with high rent. You know, the rent is too damn high. Combined with a high mortgage payment, if you have that, combined with your property taxes, combined with kids to feed, combined with everything. Groceries, guys. Right now, groceries are through the roof. I talked about this a few days ago. It was estimated that grocery prices have gone up 25% in the last couple of years. And when I said that, many of you reached out in the comments and said, no, it is far more than 25% for me. And I believe it, guys. Depending on what you buy, depending on how many people you have to feed, your grocery costs can easily be up 50% or more right now. And all this is happening simultaneously as more and more layoffs continue to be announced for 2024. We're not even done with January yet, and you're hearing all these layoffs announcements that are already happening, and it just makes me wonder, like, how much more of this are we going to see throughout the year? Most recently, you had Wayfair, the furniture company. They announced they're laying off 1,650 employees, and that's about 13% of its global workforce. That's a pretty significant chunk, and they expect that these layoffs will save the company about $280 million a year. And that's the thing, guys, like, that people need to understand about businesses. They will have no problem letting you go in order to save the company. That's what businesses do. Even if the company doesn't need saving and they want to see their profit margins increase, that's the easiest way to get there, is just by laying more people off. Wayfair said that they hired way too many people during the pandemic because their sales went up like crazy and they needed to fill some slots. And now that things are returning back to normal, they don't need all these people anymore. And it's also not a huge surprise considering furniture sales are in the toilet right now. That's one of the things that have been declining year over year in terms of what people are purchasing. And this kind of lines up with what the inflation reports have been saying. You know, they're saying that people are spending less money on furniture and appliances right now and more money on services. Service inflation is something we're going to have to look out for the rest of the year. But actually the prices on these more expensive household goods we could actually see come down because people aren't. Same thing with Macy's, guys. They announced an additional 2,000 layoffs and they're going to be closing 5 stores, and it's still just January. And of course there's many other companies that have been announcing layoffs so far this year, but these are some of the big ones, and they're some of the biggest amounts of job cuts that we're seeing. You know, 1,300 people here, 2,000 people there. Google with their 10,000 people they're laying off. Like, it's a lot of people when you add it all up. So Macy's says they're cutting about 2,350 jobs, and that's about 3.5% of their workforce. So not as substantial as Wayfair by far. And this is not really a good sign for the future of department store workers, because Macy's cites one of the reasons they're doing this is because they plan to add more automation to its supply chain and to outsource some roles. Although they didn't say which jobs are going to be outsourced. So they're looking to save money on labor costs by hiring robots and foreigners to take your job. And of course, it's not just Macy's doing this. It's just one of the many companies that are doing this, but they're the ones in the news and we're talking about them. But you know, it's funny how all of these companies, they have all these different excuses of why they're getting rid of people and all of this, but really what it always comes down to is they just want to increase their bottom line, guys. If they want to increase their profit, or they're not doing well enough, that's the first thing that's going to happen. You're going to see people get let go, and 2024 is the year that we're going to continue seeing this as a trend, because we know that a lot of companies are not doing well. Like, I covered this a week or two ago, guys, about all the small businesses right now. There's like 42% of small businesses, 43% cannot afford to pay their rent right now. And Macy's and Wayfair are not small businesses. They're big businesses that are still performing layoffs. So really the thing you have to look out for is, like, okay, you have these big companies doing this and you hear about this in the news, but what about all the smaller companies that you don't hear about that lay off 20 people, 30 people, 10 people here and there? It all adds up and it causes people financial distress. But it's kind of funny that you see all these, amazing predictions for 2024, even though we're starting the year off pretty rough here when it comes to the economic outlook and how many people are already being affected negatively by this economy. In fact, Fannie Mae, they just came out and predicted that mortgage rates they think are going to dip below 6% this year, and this is going to reignite the housing market. And I actually talked about this a little bit in yesterday's video as well, because there was another guy that was predicting that the housing market is going to go up by anywhere between 4 to 7% this year. So Fannie Mae's prediction is that we're going to see 5.8% mortgage rates by the fourth quarter of this year. And I'm going to try to save this and write this down somewhere so I can follow up on this by the fourth quarter to see if this is actually true, because I'm even curious to know if it's going to come down to that. But here's the interesting thing about their forecast is that even though they think interest rates are going to come down to 5.8% by the end of this year, they believe that by the end of 2025, it's only going to be 5.5%. So they think the majority of the interest rate cuts are going to come here in 2024 and basically hold steady throughout 2025 based on this prediction, which I find interesting because 5.5% interest rates are still notably higher than they were back when rates were 3%, guys. So you got to wonder, is this all going to be enough to get people out there to continue to buy homes? Are people going to get all fired up about a 6% rate? Because that's the other thing. When they make these predictions, it's going to be 5.8% by the end of 2024. Well, who's getting the 5.8%? Somebody with an 800 credit score, somebody that makes 6 figures a year, somebody that has no other debts, and somebody that has verifiable income and probably owns other assets. That's who's getting that 5.8% rate. Not somebody with a 650 credit score and has a $600-700 a month car payment and student loan payments and all of this. No, you're going to be looking at 6.5 still. That's almost a guarantee. That's the problem. Even if rates do drop to this amount, it doesn't reflect the rates that the average person will end up getting. So do I think that's going to be enough to unlock the housing market? I personally don't, because that's who the buyers are, guys. The buyers are the average person. That's why we're seeing home sales tanking right now, because the average person can't afford to buy. But one thing that Fannie Mae is saying in their prediction is that they think that the markets have gotten ahead of themselves because they think there's going to be all these rate cuts this year that might not actually happen on the timeline that the investors think it will. And the other thing is too, let's just pretend for a minute that this happens, right? Then interest rates for mortgages continue to fall throughout the year, which increases affordability and it draws more people into the market, right? And let's say that this whole scenario comes true, where if that were to happen, then it meets these other predictions of home prices continuing to go up. Well, if home prices continue to go up in 2024 while interest rates are dropping, is it going to actually increase affordability? The answer is no, it's not. It's going to keep affordability the same, which is unattainable for most people. So I personally think that, if rates got low enough, it can definitely draw a lot of people back into the market. But for how long, guys? Until prices get to what point are the sales just going to drop even lower? We already had in 2023 the lowest sales year for the housing market since the Great Recession. And clearly our economy was pretty messed up back then in order for home sales to drop that low. Just to put into perspective, in 2023, National Association of Realtors just came out with this figure that we barely sold 4 million homes in 2023. And in 2022, it was 5 million. In 2021, it was 6.1 million. So the numbers are staggering on how much it has been dropping. I personally think that a lot of these predictions are very optimistic for 2024, but at the same time, who knows what could happen, guys? I think that anything is possible this year, and I wouldn't be surprised by anything at this point. Fannie Mae's prediction is that they think that home prices are going to increase 3.2% this year, and they were previously saying it was going to go up by 2.8%, so they're becoming increasingly more bullish on the housing market. Here's what they say. While we expect affordability will remain stretched and the supply of homes for sale tight, easing mortgage rates is expected to begin thawing the existing sales market, which was held back in 2023 by the strong lock-in effects, which is people that don't want to sell because they have a low rate. And like I said, how does this help anybody? If a bunch of inventory comes back and all the buyers come back because the interest rates are lower, then prices go back up and once again decreases affordability. So it doesn't really help anyone for that dynamic to play out. But what we typically see in the past is not that happening. What we typically see is when interest rates come down, the buyers don't come back because the Fed is pivoting due to the fact that our economy is in trouble, and that pivot is basically beginning to mark the next recession. It's basically what history shows us. When the Fed pivots, it marks the start. The clock starts ticking on how soon it's going to be until we have our next recession, typically within 6 months, guys. So watch out for the Fed's first pivot. As soon as they start lowering rates, 6 months from there, it's almost guaranteed we're going to see a recession, at least according to history anyways. But one thing I find absolutely fascinating about all of this right now is that in January so far, it's only been a couple weeks into January, that the consumer sentiment gauge has jumped through the roof so far at the beginning of this year. Everybody in 2024 so far is completely high on last year and is ready for things to get better. The consumer sentiment gauge jumped up to 78.8 in January, and the previous month it was 69.7. 1 year ago it was 64.9. So they're saying this is the biggest increase in consumer sentiment that we've seen since 1991, like the biggest jump, you know. This has everybody all fired up that this is going to be the best year ever now. Like, forget about the recession, like that's not going to happen, guys. Like, everything is going to recover. And I just err on the side of caution of that, because that's not what history says, you know. And I would rather look at what history says and take that into serious consideration rather than just make wild predictions of what could happen in 2024. So many companies, so many CEOs, so many economists are now buying into this soft landing scenario, and they're almost certain that this is going to happen at this point. But at least some economists are coming out and warning that don't get your hopes up yet, because we're not out of this situation, guys, because, you know, there's still a bear market case for a rebound in inflation, which we're already starting to see happen right now. The rising US debt also may not fully be priced into the markets, which can cause more problems. And also the fact that this economy is largely being propped up by consumer spending, and if that there's any pullback in consumer spending, that this would result in businesses reducing their capital expenditures, i.e. layoffs, and employee headcount to limit profit margin deterioration, further exacerbating consumer spending weakness and creating a vicious downward cycle. That is the risk that we're in right now. If people stop spending money, then it's all game over, guys. So everything's being banked on the fact that you're going to continue to go out and spend more in 2024 than you did in 2023. So who's got the money for that? And they say it's not even inflation anymore that's the problem. It's the expectation for rate cuts that's the big problem right now, because the market's expecting things to return to a pre-COVID environment this year, which heavily relies on massive interest rate cuts. And we very well may not see that happen. And if we do, guys, it means that we are in big trouble. And also, guess what's going to happen? You're going to see inflation soar if they lower interest rates, because lower interest rates boost demand for loans, which spurs investment and spending. So the more they lower the rates, then the further inflation is going to go out of control again. Even the Fed themselves are only expecting to cut rates 3 times this year in 2024, and they're likely to only stick with the same plan that they did on the way up, is 25 basis point decreases at once. So that's not going to move the needle very much in 2024 if they even cut rates at all. And remember, if they start cutting more than that, it means that the economy is spiraling downwards and they're trying to save it. But once again, like always, it will be too late. And full disclosure, guys, for anybody out there wondering, it's not like I want to see our economy falter and, you know, Americans be in a bad way or anything like that. I live here, I am an American. Last thing I want is for our country to suffer. But I'm also a very realistic thinking person, and I understand that things cannot continue to go on like they have been forever. There is a limit to how far we can push this unless people really start making more money, unless people can start keeping up with the cost of everyday living. There's just not a good case for things continuing to soar to the moon from here. That's just common sense thinking. But anyways, I appreciate everybody who's been watching my videos. In fact, thanks to you guys, I think I'm going to have the highest views on my channel I've ever had for 1 month in the month of January, and it's all thanks to you. So thanks for supporting me here. Really appreciate it. it. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.